Welcome to Our Nation Today. I'm K.R. Davidson, and thanks for joining us as we look at the stories behind the headlines. As the pandemic continues, universities across Canada are urging students to get vaccinated. Students in some major universities, however, will not be required to show proof of vaccination in the fall. UBC, the U of A, and McGill have decided against requiring students to show what some people are calling a COVID-19 vaccine passport. The move is dividing staff, and not all post-secondary institutions have decided on their approach yet. Many U.S. universities, including Cornell and Northeastern, are requiring students to show proof. International travelers may have to do the same after a meeting of the G20's tourism ministers has made a declaration in this respect. So with me to discuss some of the perspectives on the vaccine passport, both at home and abroad, is Nathaniel, our senior researcher, writer, and news analyst at the Newsforum. What are you hearing on the tourism front? I know that the G20 ministers have met on this. Is this going to have an effect both internationally and at home here?
Definitely. The Prime Minister is saying that he is wanting Canada to align with our international allies as much as possible. In particular, this meaning the EU, which is coming out with a digital pass, if you will, showing your COVID records, whether you've tested negative, some of your information on your vaccine in order to ensure safety. And that's sort of what they're debating in the G20 or coming to a resolution on. So we're going to see some more developments on that, I'm sure, in the next coming time.
So there's a bit of a difference here when you're taking a look at mandating the entry into the country versus what's happening in country. I know the UK government has had cross-party support to say they are not going to require any vaccine passports within the country. But here at home, I don't know if we've had a definitive statement from the political realm in that respect, but we're definitely starting to see this pervade through at the university level.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think the universities are saying, look, we're not going to require anything. I know there's some concerns, particularly CCLA, around some of the
disclosure of healthcare information.
Exactly. Privacy.
Should
the government be, managing all this? So, that being said, the universities are saying definitely get vaccinated. We support being vaccinated. I know the University of Lethbridge just came out with a program where if you're vaccinated, you're entered into a contest and you might win some goodies and
novel approaches.
Well, and so, yeah, exactly.
Which is great. I remember talking to Professor McDonald on this, who's one of the leading experts in Canada on vaccine education and such, and she had revealed in some of the studies that when it's imposed, you actually get a lesser uptake of vaccinations than when you educate and you start to deal with things in a different manner. But it will be interesting if the government doesn't step in and you start to see actors like universities come into play. You wonder if the charter would start to reach down into the university, because this would be a clear violation of Section 7 in that regard. And the courts have started to wade into this over the last few years on some other freedom of expression issues. Universities are protected in large part just by the ability to say, here, we're mandating what happens at universities. But once they start to fulfill government objectives, you wonder whether the charter is going to kick in. And this is going to be an interesting point.
That'll be a good charter discussion, I'm sure, for the legal community at some point.
Yeah, maybe Canadian
I'm
Justice
just saying,
will
broadly
pick that up,
speaking, Canadians are very supportive of the idea of international vaccine passport requirements. That number, there was a recent survey went out for the World Economic Forum, and broadly speaking, across 28 countries, a lot of support, majority support across countries.
And then when you even take a look at young people, like this may not even be top of mind. They haven't been, their age category hasn't been opened up yet, and some of the symptoms, at least on the initial COVID-19, hasn't had as much of an impact there. So you just wonder how the considerations will go in that respect. So. The clash of individual liberties and the good of society will always be present in a properly functioning democratic country. Former Chief Supreme Court Justice Beverly McLaughlin stated, "The Charter reflects the need to balance collective state interest with individual interest. It is on this note that the delicate balance of ensuring the protection of Canadians is upheld while ensuring that we do not unnecessarily limit the rights of individuals. Governments have an important mandate to ensure that all feel safe and secure, those who are seeking to minimize the spread of COVID and those with concerns with regards to the vaccine." Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Our Nation Today. The UN is demanding Canada respond to allegations that the federal government committed racist actions in its treatment of Indigenous lobster fishers in Nova Scotia. The Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is asking for a response by July 14th. The letter of notice is around violence that occurred after the Spaganaki First Nation established a lobster fishery outside the federally regulated season. A lobster pound was destroyed and a band member's van was burnt. The First Nation says that the RCMP and Department of Fisheries and Oceans failed to take appropriate measures to prevent these acts of violence, and that treaty rights were not respected. Chief Mike Sack says he is proceeding with a lobster fishery in June and that he will request UN peacekeepers if enforcement officers remove the fishing gear. So UN peacekeepers, obviously we're not going to see UN peacekeepers coming in Canada, but it's highlighting an age-old problem that's happening on the East Coast with this conflict between First Nations treaty rights and the fishermen's associations out in that area. Give us a bit more background on that, would you?
I mean, this is a very polarizing and intense issue. I mean, the fact that you're even bringing in UN peacekeepers, it highlights either as a serious point or as a rhetorical point. I think either way, it highlights the sincerity to which both sides view this as an extremely personal issue. So,
and you're seeing acts of violence here. So,
right.
So obviously there's challenges there. Whether that could have been prevented or not by the police is another question. But obviously the tensions are high. Right. So what are the underlying tensions here when we're taking a look at the competing interest?
Right. Well, what you're seeing from the First Nation is you're saying they have a treaty right, and they have a treaty right to fish to a moderate livelihood, which is which was a treaty from the 1700s, and it's been reaffirmed in the Marshall decision recently.
Okay,
more recently.
So you've got a treaty in the 1760s, and then you've got the Marshall decision that reflects on a subsequent decision. And this is the problem. This is the problem, and I'm just going to voice this out here. It's a problem when we're expecting the courts to fix all the issues and not the politicians. Right. So the issue is you've got a criminal charge that was laid in the Marshall decision, and then before that, a similar issue, and it was about eels. But the reality is it's limited in scope. And they're saying in that decision that the treaty right actually allows the federal government to regulate. Mm-hmm. And so the fishermen in this area are able to, when we're talking like the Spaganaki, they're able to do so as long as it's not commercial fishing for sustenance and livelihood.
And this is where, and I'm going to jump off your passion point to mine, which is if we were more communicative with each other in terms of expressing what we were actually about, right? A moderate livelihood fishery is not the same as a commercial fishery, and I was reading an argument from a Mi'kmaq doctoral candidate, Shelley Denny, who she was saying, look, there's internal regulations and internal ways of doing things that provide a sustainable issue. And when you're going back to
I read that though, and I thought, well, if you have seasonality for conservation, then how do you vary from that and say it's not conservation? So, but I also have heard Chief Speck's considerations where they don't have the same fishing boats, they don't have the same size, they can't go out in the same season as some of the larger ones. So there are great arguments on both sides. I'm not hearing much of the argument on the Fishermen's Association. It would be great to be able to have more information in this area. But the reality is the DFO needs to come to the table and they need to mediate this, and there needs to be a settlement on this discussion.
I think that is the minister's job to do so, right? The actual enforcement, the rules are the rules, and until the minister provides a clear outline of what is supposed to be done, right? So, all that to say, you got arguments on conservation. They're saying our fishing isn't actually enough to change the conservation levels. This is a moderate livelihood. We're not actually impacting the breeding stock,
they're actually saying that the interpretation in Marshall is not correct, and that the federal government can't give any regulation. That's what they're saying. And so that's a bit of a divergence, but it doesn't preclude the federal government from coming to the table and mediating this and bringing leadership where leadership's due. The reality is that any act of violence is unacceptable. And in this case, it reveals the underlying tension between the Spaganaki First Nation and the Fishermen's Associations. If one peeks beyond the surface of this issue, you will quickly see that there is the need for leadership by the federal government in exercising their fiduciary role to Indigenous groups to bring about a negotiated settlement between the Mi'kmaq and the Fishermen Associations as part of a broader effort to allow reconciliation of Aboriginal societies with Canadian society. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these commercial messages. Welcome back to Our Nation Today. The Royal Canadian Air Force has stated that they do not have enough pilots, and they are working with the government in an effort to remedy this issue. Despite efforts to boost the number of pilots, they are stating that there are not enough Canadians interested in the position. Now, the head of the RCAF says the military is working with Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada to facilitate and streamline the enrollment of experienced pilots from abroad. Lieutenant General Meitzinger says most of those who would be interested in flying under the Maple Leaf include pilots from NATO member countries or other European countries. But this may also draw from experienced pilots from India. While Canada's lengthy fighter jet procurement process continues, it seems Canada is not going to be alone with a pilot shortage. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, a new study suggests an upcoming global pilot shortage for the aviation industry. So here we are, we're talking about aviation, the Air Force again, 2 weeks in a row.
Wow,
exciting topics from the beginning.
Right.
Okay, so we talked last week about the procurement and the age-old problem that the Armed Forces is having with getting new jets for our fighter pilots and some of the training issues. But we're actually seeing now there's a hard to believe a global shortage of pilots that's going to be forthcoming.
I was educated reading into this issue myself because I thought, well, so many planes down,
Exactly,
pilots,
you would think things are slowing down.
Is this necessary? However, what I found interesting is that actually, passenger recovery doesn't dictate pilot recovery numbers, right? Because
you still need the same number, you need
right?
runs to certain destinations, and you still need pilots to do those runs.
Oliver Wyman did a report in 2019. Over 60% of the airlines that they were speaking to said that recruitment or pilot shortages were an issue. That was 2019, right? That was just before the pandemic. Then now they're saying this is still going to be an issue coming down the pipeline.
So they're forecasting in 2023 that they're going to have, I think, shortages of 10 to 15% globally.
Right.
And they said that actually North America is going to be one of the major centers of those shortages.
Right.
So the question is, what's the military doing in this respect? We're taking a look at actually bringing in pilots into the country, it's an interesting concept to bring people in to be part of your armed forces.
Well, and
I think we used to call that something, but
this is where you start to wonder where some of this is. Now, the beauty of if you're a NATO pilot, you're already trained. Interoperability means that you could theoretically operate with different NATO partners in different ways. So NATO allies may have or NATO pilots may have a leg up in the whole learning process. However, yeah, we're reaching out. Allies around the world, including India, other European countries.
I think we were about 1,500 pilots short. They've started to address that. I think they offered some pilots that were in retirement to come back. I think we got about a whole 15 that came and responded to that. Yeah. But I take a look at a lot of young people and I go, this will be a fantastic job.
Well, I mean, what does it take to become a pilot these days, commercially?
Well,
right?
I know you're asking me for my great background in being a pilot. I've taken 2 stabs at it and maybe got about 15 hours under my belt. But actually, I think we're taking about 250 hours to be able to get there. In Canada, I think we're somewhere around. I don't know.
And back to your point on the despite the RCAF has been recruiting for pilots for some time. There's a whole dedicated unit that's basically focused on trying to get pilots who retired, back into uniform.
Sure.
It's not seeing the sort of return on the investment that they're expecting.
But I think those that are entering the marketplace, like why not reach out to your grade 12, your college level programs, and say, like, you can be an Air Force pilot.
Right.
And
guess
basically you go
what?
from there, you can
After-
hop into a beautiful job thereafter.
Sure.
And so when you take a look at it, like even flight school, you're taking like, it's around 30,000 or so. That's probably equivalent to what your bachelor's degree is going to be. When we're taking a look at the numbers that are coming forward, they're going to be earning way more money and they're probably earlier retirement than what we would see otherwise.
And especially if there's going to be a global shortage of pilots, because if that's the case, then costs are going to rise, salaries are going to go up in order to entice more people.
And that's what they're predicting. They're saying that there's going to be just a greater increase in salaries, and this is good. I think that this is a great place for young people to take a look at. So. So the challenge of COVID-19 and the effect on our Air Force appears to keep making headlines. While in this instance, we are seeing that our Air Force is merely feeling the pressure of a global shortage of pilots, that, while not on the forefront of people's minds at this time, will present itself as a challenge to the recovery of airlines as they emerge from the pandemic. On this note, it appears that this may be an opportunity for those entering the marketplace to consider a short-term investment for what appears to be inevitably long-term gains in employment. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to be taking a look at a U.S. emergency declaration around a recent cyber attack. Welcome back to Our Nation Today. The U.S. has issued a rare emergency declaration after a cyber attack recently targeted a critical pipeline. Colonial Pipeline shut down all operations on Friday after hackers broke into its networks. All 4 of its main lines remain offline, but the company hopes to have operations resume by the end of this week. According to the FBI, a criminal group known as DarkSide is responsible for the attack. Colonial says it delivers about 45% of all fuel consumed on the East Coast. The cyber attack comes days ahead of the planned closure of Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline by the governor of Michigan. Okay, so this is interesting. We're seeing most of the East Coast shut down for their energy needs, at least their pipeline crude needs. And then tomorrow we've got Pipeline 5. That's a pretty interesting dynamic to be dealing with.
Well, we'll see what actually happens with Line 5.
That's right, because we spoke about that last week.
Court-mediated discussions, but could happen.
So anyway. So let's take a look at this, because this is a real and present issue. I think that there's a lot of concern regarding the security infrastructure around so many vital areas in our society.
Anything that's connected to the internet.
Yeah,
cybersecurity.
There was a cyber attack in Florida on a water treatment plant where they were able to hack into the water treatment plant to poison the water supply. And the only reason it was caught is because an employee was there manually and saw it happening. With everybody working remotely now, I think that there's precarious situations at best. It's not just government entities anymore, it's organizations, business,
exactly
etc.
And I mean, what's interesting about this dark side, they fancy themselves a bit of a Robin Hood, steal from the rich, give to the poor. A portion of the money that they, let's say, raise, right, or raid, they donate to charitable sources.
Which a lot of charities are kicking back.
A lot of them have said, no, we don't want any of
this
money, right? But yeah, so I mean, they're ransomware. So they take files, they encrypt them, you pay money, and then you get them back, or they publish them online, which a lot of companies don't want.
Yeah,
right?
and this is actually different than most ransomware. There's a website on the dark web that is actually set up. You can see all of the companies that have been hacked. And they actually show how many gigabytes of information they have. So this hacker is very different in that not only are they asking for money to be able to get your files back, they're actually holding you hostage so that if you don't give them money, they'll reveal all your trade secrets and everything publicly.
That's right.
So this is bringing it to a bit of a different level, and to have it say it's an ethical hacking.
Well, I mean, half of the energy supply, roughly, of the East Coast of the United States.
We'll talk about their code of conduct. Did you get a chance to see what their criteria is
there? I glanced at it. It was all very, high-minded sounding, but at the end of the day, what are you doing? You're stealing. You're stealing information. You're putting, lives at risk potentially from this. You're shutting down energy, right? Energy,
absolutely,
which we need.
It's interesting. I'm going to play on their code of conduct.
Okay,
because they said they won't attack universities, hospitals, schools, etc., or any any organizations in any former Soviet countries. But they've basically given the green light. If you're a for-profit in some form or fashion, then you're going to be hit. So, and at the same time, they say they're apolitical. The reality is,
this is exactly,
please, yeah.
They issued a statement. I think they are a little concerned when they saw the reaction. They say they're apolitical. They don't participate in geopolitics. Don't tie us to a government. Look for other motives. They say, the goal is to make money, not create problems for society. I very much do not understand how this has not created a problem for society.
Well, and a lot of people are surmising that the people that are behind this are probably associated with national security interests in other countries. We saw the solar winds attack recently on all of the U.S. government institutions.
What's interesting on this is that the U.S. government and the FBI, President Biden, have said this is a ransomware criminal gang. They're not linking it to any country, at least as of yet.
Yeah, this isn't, but the solar winds is, the Microsoft Exchange from Chinese state
cybersecurity is the threat. This is what CSIS has highlighted numerous times. CSIS report 2020. Cybersecurity, cyber espionage. These are the main threats to Canada's national security, or some of the main threats.
I know we'll be talking more about this going forward.
I hope not. Yeah.
Overnight, workplaces have shifted to working remotely, and with this, increased exposure to attacks on security infrastructure is an issue for all organizations. Apple's Tim Cook has reflected that some of the top people in cybersecurity predict that the next big war will be fought on cybersecurity. The most recent attack emphasizes that large-scale attacks will not merely be targeted at government entities and organizations providing critical infrastructure or clearly targets. This is a wake-up call for all organizations to review their security plans and ensure that they are keeping pace with the rapid changes in technology. Thanks for watching Our Nation today. Remember, keep examining, and thanks for being with us.